What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and I'm sorry you can't see my handsome face today. I know I'm muy guapo, but I've actually already recorded this video once, and the audio track ended up sounding like two butts being rubbed together. So I figured I'd just use the onboard microphone from my camera, right? Well, that sounds like four butts being rubbed together. So here I am, just recording this video one more time, and just doing an audio track to save time. And I know it's probably still really late getting this video out, so I apologize for that. But I do want to talk about these cards. So there's a lot of crazy Friday Guilds of Ravnica spoilers, so let's go ahead and get into it. But before we do that, let's make sure to like the video if you got time for that. Really helps out my YouTube metrics. Share it around, subscribe if you haven't done that for more spoilers. Make sure you hit the bell for notifications, and let's go ahead and talk about Venerated Loxodon here. This is 5 mana, 4 and a white for a 4/4 Elephant Cleric with Convoke, and when it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that convoked it. Well, this is awesome to me. This looks like it might single-handedly make white 1-drops with 1 toughness worth playing again in a Goblin Chainwhirler meta. Obviously, this shouldn't be too hard to get down on turn 3 in a white aggro deck that's got a butt-ton of, white 1 and 2 drops. So if you're on the play, this is a way to protect your team from Goblin Chainwhirler. I guess we already have Banalish Marshal do the same thing on the play, but this gives us a critical mass of ways to protect against Chainwhirler as long as we went first that game. So this is a great reason to play white aggro, and again, might single-handedly make white 1-drops that already look pretty good but have been locked out of the format by Mr. Chains actually playable again. So I'm super excited for the Elephant. But another card from last night that I'm really excited about is Blood Operative. And actually, for Demir cards, maybe I should get right up on the mic and speak in dulcet, furtive tones, secretive tones. Is this good for the ASMR crowd out there? I'm not sure. But anyway, Blood Operative is 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a 3/1 Vampire Assassin. The good creature types just keep on coming in this set. But anyway, it's got lifelink, and when it enters the battlefield, you may exile target card from a graveyard. And whenever you surveil, if Operative's in your graveyard, you can pay 3 life. If you do, return Operative to your hand. Now, this is pretty sweet looking for a few reasons. There's a lot of text on the card, and every single bit of it's relevant. But even if it didn't have that, exile a card from a graveyard bit, I think it would still be playable. With it, it's amazing in a format with a bunch of graveyard strategies, or at least it looks like it will be. So there's that. But we needed another recursive creature, especially with Scrounger leaving the format. This is pretty cool, even though it's only when you surveil that it triggers and you can bring it back to your hand. But there's plenty of just incidental surveil on already good cards. So this could see tons of play as just another recursive threat for both, decks that play mostly even at instant speed, control decks and stuff. Could have a recursive creature that can bring back late in the game to help stabilize. The lifelink really helps with that. So I kind of like that, but, especially mid-range decks that are looking for a 3-drop, Golgari decks that want a recursive card, could use this if they pair up with the Sultai Guild, which it looks like they wanted to do anyway. Again, there's plenty of incidental good surveil cards anyway, and I could definitely see the Golgari getting down with that and recursing this guy over and over in a given game. I do like that he costs 3 life to recur, but he also has lifelink and 3 power, so he'll sort of, quote-unquote, pay for himself when you bring him back to your hand, eventually at least. Again, good way to stabilize, decent at least against Chainwhirler even. So I like the card a lot, and I think that there's a lot of things about this meta that's going to make this card see play. But let's look at Liddell Captain right here. This is 3 mana, 1 a green and a white for a 2/2 Elf Knight. And whenever it attacks, you may tap any number of untapped creatures you control. Captain gets +1/+1 for each creature tapped this way until end of turn. You can also pump 5 mana into him, 3 a green and a white, to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. Well, this is cool. It's how you say my name in French, by the way, Liddell. But aside from that, I do like that, especially in Limited, where this card looks like it'll shine. I don't think this is a constructed card at all. 3 mana for a 2/2 is not where you want to be, even though it does have a cool mana sink activated ability. It just costs so much to make a 1/1 guy. So it doesn't look like a constructed card, but it does look like a limited all-star where it can help you go wide. In Sealed and Draft, this actually is a really good mana sink. And it's cool that it's a card that allows you to go big when you've gone wide. I've talked about this a couple of times recently. Sometimes decks that go wide need to occasionally go big. Wide isn't the right game plan on certain board states. So if the deck needs to go big, it can just tap a bunch of dudes and make this like a 7/7 and swing in. So I like a lot of implications as this as far as like Selesnya in Limited goes. But again, I don't think we'll see it anywhere outside of there. But I guess the last thing I'll say is that for flavor reasons, I like that we're seeing a bunch of dudes riding wolves this set. That's all. But up next, let's take a look at Conclave Centaur right here. A lot of buzz around this card since last night. This is a 4/4 creature for 2 green and 2 white. It's a Centaur Knight with Vigilance. And when it dies, you create 2 green and white 2/2 Elf Knight creature tokens with Vigilance. It's sort of like Wormcoil Engine, or at least that's what everyone's been saying. It's not as good as Wormcoil, but it's still a pretty decent creature for the mana cost. 4/4 Vigilance is at least decent stats for what you're putting into it, as long as you have the mana to cast it. And when it dies, you get its same power and toughness back with Vigilance, just on 2 guys, which is arguably better in some ways than 1/4/4. So this is crazy in a lot of ways. Again, I'm not sure if it makes the cut in Standard just because it costs 4 and there's so much competition at that slot right now. Even for white decks, you want to play a Johnny too, sometimes Shalai. So I'm just not 100% sure that this really makes the cut, but obviously this ability has historically proven to be nuts, especially in certain decks, tokens decks and aristocrats decks that want, to sacrifice permanents. This is pretty decent. And even just, on its face, if you're not trying to do nasty aristocrat stuff with it, it still grows. Because it's almost always going to 2-for-1 the opponent. It trades in combat, kills something, and makes 2/2/2s. So, and if you've got, anything that boosts your team, anthem effects and such, this becomes pretty disgusting. Vigilance is good in this format, not only because of cards like Seal Away are going to be good, removal pieces, but also because of Convoke. Vigilance creatures can attack and still Convoke during your second main phase. All that, and the creature type here is right. This creates 2 knights for History of Benalia to eventually buff. So there are a lot of cool standard implications for this. So you definitely see the card doing something, obviously. It's one of the more pushed cards in this cycle. But speaking of pushed cards in this cycle, there's also Crackling Drake. This is 4 mana, obviously. 2 blue and 2 red for a star 4 Drake with flying, and the star is equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Well, that makes it good, in my eyes at least, Just about any creature that draws a card when they enter the battlefield is basically just replacing themselves immediately. So even if you lose it to removal or in combat, then you still didn't really lose a card off of it in terms of card advantage. Creatures like this are pretty much always good. So I like it. It's going to be really good in Limited if you're building the Is It Spells deck, but even in Standard if you're building the Is It Spells deck, this looks maybe like it takes a spot, just because, again, drawing a card is so busted. But, we've got a good budget brew going, good coffee brewing for this deck, because we've already got Enigma Drake. We saw that reprinted just recently. And then this is our 4-drop. But obviously, you can't play a bunch of creatures in your spells deck. That's counterintuitive. So we'll see how many copies make the cut. But it's definitely going to make the cut in the budget spells deck, and I can't wait to play it. It looks ridiculous. But we might as well finish this cycle with a card I didn't get to yesterday. This is True Fire Captain. It's a 4/3 human knight, and it costs 2 red and 2 white to cast. Whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target player. Now, the reason I didn't get to this yesterday is that there were lots of rough translations for it, and most of the translations are still rough, but we can confirm that the creature has what appears to be Mentor. It does have a word followed by reminder text, and that is almost certainly Mentor, especially considering you can see the +1/+1 down there in the reminder text. So I believe it's been confirmed to be Mentor at this point, which is decent because it's a 4-power Mentor creature, and that's awesome. But obviously the big attraction here is the Boros Reckoner text on it, which is awesome considering we do have Star of Extinction in Standard, and that makes you want to do all kinds of crazy stuff, which people are doing. There's already a really weird combo deck being brewed up. It's like 4 colors, which I guess I'll touch on later, but that deck does not look serious. But this card actually could see some Standard play. I wish the stats were switched to 3/4. That would be a lot better. But even at a 4/3, this is decent power for what you're investing in it. It's got the right creature type, I guess, if you're playing the History of Benalia deck. And the Boros Reckoner ability is actually really, really good just in traditional, just normal combat. So I do like a lot about this card, and I think there is an edge chance that it might see Standard play outside of some weird combo deck. But let's talk about Hunted Witness here. This is just 1 white mana for a 1/1 human, and when it dies, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. Yay, a Sword of Doom Traveler is back in Standard. And you could argue that for practical purposes, this is in some ways better than a Doom Traveler, because Doom Traveler creates a flyer, a 1/1 flyer. This creates a lifelink guy. So this helps you, extend the game against aggro decks, block more till you get to the mid game. I like that about it. It's decent for aristocrats decks, obviously. This is great for aristocrats Aristocrats decks, but it's also another piece of anti-Chain Whirler tech, and that's awesome. This is another white 1-drop that we can play against Chain Whirler and not really have to worry that much. It actually gets better if Chain Whirler kills it. You know, it's an Obi-Wan. If you strike it down, it becomes more powerful. So I'm super hyped to play this card. It doesn't look like much at first glance, but it's good in a number of different decks, and it's specifically good in this meta, so you can almost guarantee it's going to see play. But here's Swiftblade Vindicator, which is an awesome name, and the art looks really good too on this card. But it's a red and a white for a 1/1 human soldier with double strike, vigilance, and trample, which is crazy. 3 really good keyword abilities on one card, and this is obviously meant to be mentored in limited and possibly even in standard, where, you know, even if you just make it a 2/2, it becomes really good all of a sudden. And even at a 1/1, it's at least okay. It's like a really, really good fencing ace. So I like a lot about this card, and even just throw like 1 red aura on it on turn 3 and it starts looking really, really good, you know. Like there's a Healer's Hawk deck shaping up. It's really budget, and it's red and white, maybe Jeskai even. But it's looking actually like it might be relatively powerful, and Swiftblade Vindicator is going to be a decent 2-drop for that deck. But we'll see how good this actually is in the Chain Whirler meta. It kind of puts me off of the card, but it's obviously really sweet, and if you can make it any bigger than it already is when it comes into play, then it's a really dangerous creature. But while we're on Boros, I'll get to a card that's really good with the last card I just talked about. And I also didn't get to yesterday because of rough translations. But today, we have an English version of Aurelia Exemplar of Justice, so I know exactly what it does. No speculation. This is 4 mana, 2 a red and a white, for a legendary angel. It's 2/5, and it has flying and mentor. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target creature you control. Until end of turn, that creature gets +2/+0, gains trample if it's red, and gains vigilance if it's white. Well, there was some degree of speculation yesterday that the translation for this was if it's trample, if it's red, it gains haste, which would have been much better, especially given the fact that Aurelia can target herself. But since you can't do that, the card's a little bit worse, but it still has a form of haste, given that it can target a creature the turn it comes into play. Obviously, if the creature is red and white, that's all the better. It gets both things. And this is yet another really good mentor card, because if it targets itself when it attacks, then it gets really big and can mentor just about anything. So there's a lot of cool stuff about this card, but it doesn't replace Hazoret or anything. It doesn't replace Rekindling Phoenix for that matter, which we can still play in Standard. Although it does block Rekindling Phoenix really well, so we got to point that out. I think the card could see some play. If the Boros deck even wants to play 4-drops, this is probably the one it's going to be on. And if it stays in play for any more than a turn or two, I could definitely see it being ridiculous during the attack step, and really adding a lot of value in the form of mentor permanently to your creatures. So this is one of those creatures that, again, if it stays in play for more than a few turns, it just becomes ridiculous and ends the game relatively quickly, but it's got to stay in play. Again, I like the form of virtual haste on it, in that it can boost a creature the turn it comes out, but I'm not sure that's truly enough to let it see the level of play that a card like Hazoret did, but you could argue that's a good thing. But let's look at Detour right here, and this is rough translation. We're not really actually sure if the name is Detour, but everything else we know about it. This is 3 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands or gates, and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Well, this is a strictly better explosive vegetation in every way, and explosive vegetation saw play all the times it's been in Standard. And the art is way better for what it's worth. FWIW, it's good art. So there's that. This is a decent replacement for Hour of Promise, I guess. We'll never get 2 zombies off of it, but it's still fine for a 1-mana discount. It's a really, really good card, and if ramp is a thing, it's going to play all 4 copies of this pretty much no matter what. And the fact that it can put gates into play actually helps stretch your mana a lot. And this will fix your mana to do pretty much whatever you want it to do by the time you untap the next turn. So the card's almost certainly going to see some play if ramp is important. But let's take a look at Omnispell Adept, every casual player's favorite card from today. This is 5 mana, 4 and a blue for a 3/4 human wizard, and the activated ability is outrageous. It's 2 and a blue for a tap. You may cast an instant or sorcery card from your hand without paying its mana cost. Now, yeah, that ability is dumb. If you can actually ever activate the ability, and you have a spell of reasonable size to feed to it, then it is a ridiculous card. But I'm just not sure this will actually see any play at the top tables of Standard. You do have to wait an entire turn to actually use this thing, which is sometimes a death knell in Standard, but it does survive Lightning Strike. That may be a consideration, but I'm just not really seeing it personally. There's probably 100 better things you could be doing in Tier 1 and 2 of Standard, but you can like cast Apex of Power off of this. which is probably the nastiest thing you can do with it in Standard. But there's also like Overflowing Insight, looks pretty dumb. So yeah, and it does ignore timing restrictions from everything I can tell. There was kind of a battle about that earlier today, but it looks like, yeah, it's confirmed this does ignore timing restrictions, so you can play sorceries at the end of your opponent's turn, which may also be good enough. So I'm not sure. Well, like, actually I am sure. I'm like 100%, well, 98% sure this won't see any Standard play, but there is plenty of dumb stuff you can do with this. You know, True Heart Captain or True Fire Captain that I was talking about earlier. One of the dumb combo decks people are building is this, True Fire Captain, Lazav, and Star of Extinction, because you can just dump all the relevant creatures into your graveyard like True Fire Captain and Omnispell Adept. You basically make your Lazav into Omnispell Adept, tap it for its ability, cast Star of Extinction for 3 mana out of your hand, and then at instant speed while it's still on the stack, you can turn Lazav into Truefire Captain and win the game that way. It's a really stupid 4-color combo that's almost impossible to ever happen, but we can dream, and it's a possibility. So I at least want to alert you of the dumb stuff that you can do with this card, but again, it's probably never going to happen at one of the top tables in Standard. But up next, here's Glaive of the Guild-Pact here. This is 2 mana for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each gate you control and has Vigilance and Menace. Equipped 3, by the way. And this is probably really bad in Standard, you know. Even in a Gates deck, I just don't know that this is really enough of a payoff, but in Limited, this is ridiculous. Especially if Gates occur at the rate that they appear they may occur at. You know, there's a bunch of slots for them in the set, and they're common, so you'll probably get a few Gates in Limited. If you're building the 3 or 4 color Gates deck, this is actually a really good payoff in Draft or Sealed, which makes a creature like, you know, +2, +3, +0, something like that some of the time. And Vigilance and Menace are definitely good abilities in Limited. So this is probably really impactful in that format and literally nowhere else. But up next, let's take a look at one of my favorite cards from the day. This is Connive and Concoct, but actually it's the Dimir card, so hold on. Connive and Concoct. Connive is 4 mana, 2 and 2 hybrid Dimir mana for a sorcery. Gain control of target creature with power 2 or less. Concoct, 5 mana, 3, a blue and a black for a sorcery. Surveil 3, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. But back to my real voice. Finally, is all I want to say with this card. I've been waiting for a 5 mana reanimation piece. Really, I wanted a 4 mana reanimation piece, but 5 mana is kind of the going rate anyway these days, and this does plenty of extra stuff. Lots and lots of extra stuff, actually. It looks like there's going to be plenty of creatures that you might want to steal with the Connive half of this card, but again, it's the Concoct half that I'm really interested in. You know, I'm willing to pay 5 mana for a reanimation piece in a Soul Tide deck, and this is even better than what I wanted because it allows you to surveil 3 before you even pick the creature, you know? Just like Mission Briefing from the other day. It's important that you don't actually target a creature until this spell basically resolves. You know, they can't go ahead and pick the creature that you're targeting to remove from your graveyard with an instant speed effect. Really like that about this card, a lot like Mission Briefing. But aside from even that upside, this allows you to surveil 3, see more cards, fix your next draw step, or obviously dump an important creature in the graveyard for reanimating in the first place. So even if you don't have a specific target in mind when you cast the spell, Concoct can still be really good and fills your graveyard by a lot. So I really, really like this card. And again, that's not to take away from the Connive half of it. But up next is Creeping Chill right here. This is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a sorcery. It deals 3 damage to each opponent and you gain 3 life. But when it's put into your graveyard from your library, you may exile it. If you do, it deals 3 damage to each opponent and you gain 3 life. So you can get this for free, Narcomoeba style, if you mill it into your own graveyard. And I actually don't think the card is very good, but I do have a special affinity for it. This kind of reminds me of the Yawgmoth's Bargain days back in 1998, where you win the game off of Soul Feast. You just cast it a total of 5 times because of Yawgmoth's Will. And win the game that way. Creeping Chill cannot do that, but I do think this might actually be a great way to either add to your life total and extend the game against decks that are attacking you for damage, or even deal that last few damage. So it's a sort of a reach tool against, you know, slower, controlling, and other mid-range decks. For these decks that are going to surveil anyway and put a bunch of cards in their graveyard from their library. So I actually think this card has a shot, even though it doesn't affect the board state in any way. It's just kind of a free Sovereign's Bite. But is that worth a slot in your deck? That's probably It's probably not most of the time. I'm going to keep it real with you. I don't have high hopes for this, but I do think that this could be a playable card in exactly the right deck. So I am going to keep an eye out for it. I like this card mostly for sentimental, nostalgic reasons, but it's a possibility that a Narcomoeba style effect on a spell like this could actually be really good. Casting spells for free is historically a nice thing to be able to do. But let's check out Dimir's Spybug. I like this card a lot too. This is just 2 mana, a blue and a black for a 1/1 insect with flying and menace. And whenever you surveil, you put a +1/+1 counter on Spybug. Now, this is the kind of card I shouldn't like, but I actually really do. Looks great in limited. You know, if you've got a pretty good amount of surveil effects, this can get up to like 4/4, 5/5, and then it's ridiculous. Your opponent has to deal with it. So if left unchecked, this can actually win games in limited for you. But even in standard, in like a budget surveil deck, I could definitely see this being an easy 4-of. So again, I don't see it at the top tables, but I'm kind of the budget guy around these parts, and I'm definitely going to put it in a budget surveil deck where it's probably going to be an all-star. But let's take a look at Enhanced Surveillance here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an enchantment. You may look at an additional 2 cards each time you surveil, and if you exile Surveillance or Enhanced Surveillance, shuffle your graveyard into your library, where I could definitely see a surveil deck wanting a piece like this. This will be a 4-of in the surveil deck more than likely. At least a 3-of, right? But probably a 4-of because it's confirmed the effect does stack. So if you have 2 of these in play, you'll look at 4 extra cards every time you surveil, and yes, you can dump those extra cards into your graveyard. That's confirmed as well. So this could actually be great, although I'm really not seeing this seeing too much serious standard play. I think if you're looking to play a quote-unquote do-nothing enchantment on turn 2, or just pay 2 mana for 1 in the first place, then Search for Escanta is definitely miles, leagues above this card. So unless you're doing a lot of really tricky stuff with Surveil, your entire deck is based on surveilling, then you're probably not going to play this card at all. And even if your entire deck is based around surveilling, a lot of surveil cards are just good cards where surveil is incidentally tacked on. And this is not that. Although it is a decent payoff for surveil, I again just really don't see this being worth 3 or 4 slots where, you know, you could devote those slots to something better. But let's look at Disinformation Campaign. Cool name for a card, and good art too. It's 3 mana, 1, a blue, and a black for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and each opponent discards a card. And whenever you surveil, return campaign to its owner's hand. This is a much better surveil payoff in some ways. This always 2-for-1s the opponent every time you cast it, given that they have cards in their hand. And the least it can do for you is draw your card for 3 mana. Not bad. Although I do like Reign of Notions a little bit better. All things considered, you don't have to do any work to get that card to be twice as good as this one. Although Reign of Notions doesn't make them discard any cards, it still lets you see 4 cards, draw 2, it's card advantage immediately. It's a better read the bones in a lot of ways. So I'd pick, as far as cards with this mana cost in this set, I'd pick Reign of Notions to see play over this any day. But if you can cast it twice, it's doing an awful lot of work for you. Let's also check out Lotleth's Giant. There were a bunch of cards spoiled just recently, right before I came into the booth to record this the second time. But this is the only one I think is truly impactful. This is 7 mana, 6 and a black for a 6/5 zombie giant with Undergrowth. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent for each creature card in your graveyard. Now the other day... What have you done? Now, the other day, I talked about a green creature that costs 4 mana. It's got haste, and it gets a +1/+1 counter for each creature card in your graveyard when it enters the battlefield. I wanted to do some tricksy stuff with that, but this looks like it's a much better, candidate for that kind of deck, for winning the game in that kind of deck. So I want to reanimate this and hit the opponent for 20 after just flipping my library into my graveyard. I want to give it a shot. I think it's going to be a fun deck to try and brew up. And this might even end up just being a 1-of in the Golgari or Sultai deck in Standard. And I'm being totally serious. Because again, if you can reanimate this towards the very end of the game, then there's no telling. You might be able to zap the opponent for like 10 or 12 damage all at one time. And I definitely think that an ability like that could see some Standard play. But we're almost ready to bring it home here. Here's Ritual of Soot. It's 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a sorcery. Destroy all creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less. If you needed any more, evidence that they're never going to reprint Damnation in Standard, this is it right here. But don't be too mad. Baby Damnation, Baby Languish is still really, really good, and it's going to see all the play. We needed a black sweeper to replace Bontu's and to replace, Yahini's expertise. So this is definitely going to see play. There's really not much more to say about it, other than this is probably going to prove to be one of the better or more played cards from the entire set. It's going to make Esper or just Dimir Control a very, very good deck, because it's going to be one of the only decks with a very good relatively cheap sweeper at its disposal. So I do like this an awful lot, and I wish I had more to say about it, but the analysis pretty much stops at it's a good Magic card. But up next is Trostani Discordant, and I guess if I have to read all the Dimir cards in the furtive Dimir voice, you know, whisper voice, then I should probably read all the Selesnya cards like a hippie. Like, Trostani Discordant, man, costs 5 mana, 3 green and a white for a 1/4 legendary Dryad. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. Spread the love, bruh. And whenever a Discordant enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink. At the beginning of your end step, man, each player gains control of all creatures they own. What a weird line of text it is at the very end. But I guess we have like Hostage Taker in this format. We have Connive. We just looked at that card. So, and this is probably at least edge decent in other formats because I'm probably missing something. But at least there's that. Maybe in Commander that's a thing. I don't know. I guess in Standard there are some implications, but I'm worried about the rest of the card, which I think may genuinely be better than Regal Caracal. Very similar cards in a lot of ways, but this gives other creatures you control +1/+1 no matter what, and that's awesome. So it's probably going to bring a bunch of power into the battlefield with it. Note that it basically creates 2/2 soldier tokens with lifelink. So it's bringing 4 lifelink power onto the battlefield, plus a power of its own. It's relatively tough to kill, can't kill it with a lightning strike, you know. So there are a lot of things I really like about this card. Obviously, you can't stack them like you could Regal Caracal because it's legendary, but still, this is bound to see some amount of play if Selesnya is a real deck at all. It's an Anthem effect. It's tough to deal with. It brings other value into play with it. Great in tokens builds, you know. Decent in Convoke builds for that matter. So there's just so much good on this card that even though 5 mana is relatively steep, I do think it's worth the cost. I guess that's all I've got for this one. That's all the cards so far today that I feel like are worth covering. As always, I'll leave a link in the description to Mythic Spoiler if you want to catch up on absolutely everything. But these are the cards that are impactful either in Limited or in Standard or other formats for that matter. Make sure you get down there, put our heads together, comment, and do all the other stuff. You know, follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and check out my sponsored TCG player down there. First link in the description. Right now they have booster boxes on pre-order of this set for $91, which is crazy. They're going to be easily $100 in just a couple of weeks upon release, at least. So get them for a discount while you can. Hit the link in the description, obviously, too. You can pre-order singles. And even if you're not going to spend any money right now, you can always use this as a price guide, kind of a barometer for where cards are in pre-order season, pre-release season. And that's always good too. So lots of reasons to hit the link. Helps me out, improves my metrics. Do that. Hit the link in the description for TCG Player. But with that, pretty sure I'll catch you cats later. I've been Deb from the place, and I'll be back on camera so you can see my face next time. I know I'm muy guapo. I'm a very pretty man, so I promise you'll be able to see me next time, but I'll catch you cats later. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.